This is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoy this Critical Thought, your daily discussion on game design. And be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and you can pitch future Critical Thought topics. Alright, before we get started with today's Critical Thought, I've updated the intro tags that you'll be seeing for the other video spotlights here on the channel. And what I'm looking for, any new games you would like me to check out, be them indie, AA, AAA, anything that you think that I would be interested in spotlighting. And that goes for you developers as well. If you're working on a game that you think I would like, be sure to get in touch with me, and I'll be more than happy to take a look at it. One suggestion was for another game from the Curse Castelia developer, Curse of Izio. I completely butchered that and I apologize, but I will be putting up a spotlight video for that most likely tomorrow. But let's get today's Critical Thought, and this is going to be a juicy one. We're going to be talking about the debate over self-censorship in games. And depending upon how widespread this video gets, I'm sure there's going to be a whole lot of comments down below. When we're talking about self-censorship, this is not the same as censoring a game due to government or country restrictions. As we have talked about before, each country has different restrictions or rules of what it deems appropriate for its audience. There is the example we talked about with Hotline Miami 2 being originally banned in Australia. There's gratuitous violence in Germany. And of course, there was the example, I think, of World of Warcraft having to have its character models altered for China. But when we're talking about self-censorship, this is the act of a game developer willingly altering a game's content when it gets ported to other countries and essentially other cultures. And when it comes to the video game industry, the big example of this, at least from where we're sitting here, is United States and Japan. Talking about Japanese culture and manga and anime and all that is definitely way beyond the scope of today's Critical Thought, and I am sure there are people who are more versed in it who have talked about it before. But the point that you need to understand, and how it relates to video games, has to do with the age of consent. In Japan, the age of consent for women is younger than is the United States. And I'm sure you all are probably thinking the same thing like I am right now, what that entails. And what that means, of course, is a lot of anime, manga, and of course video games feature younger female characters and of course being sexualized as well. And this is one of those major points when a game is ported from Japan to the United States. Obviously, we have a older age of consent here, and it's definitely frowned upon about that kind of stuff for younger women or younger female characters. And generally, when a game from Japan gets ported over here, it will be self-censored in some way, shape, or form. Earlier, I think in 2016, the latest Fire Emblem game had its, I don't even remember what the exact name of it, the minigame where you're able to touch characters or massage them or whatever that was, I think either downplayed or removed. Bravely Default, when it was brought over, all the female characters were aged up and some of their more revealing outfits were altered for the United States. And I'm sure there are plenty more examples out there. There was recently a game, I think, ported from, Nice, America, that was also having a little bit or stirring some controversy regarding its content. But when it comes to the debate of self-censorship, it boils down to essentially the two sides. And one of them has to do with preserving content, and the other has to do with the market or accessibility. And let's start with the market side. As we know, content like this is very divisive. Divisive, I hope I just said that right. My mouth is incredibly dry today. And what that means is when you release a game like this in the United States, you are immediately going to repel people from playing your game. It goes without saying. Something like Dragon's Crown, for instance. The second some people saw the exaggerated characters, that was it. They weren't going to look at this game any more than that. And when it comes to getting your game out there, making sure it's successful, Making it as accessible as possible is a major deal. And depending upon the company and what their plans are, that may be the most important thing on their minds. When you look at Square Enix, for instance, we pretty much had to assume that anything sexualized or controversial in any one of their games is going to be self-censored and altered for the United States. They want to make money. And if they can alter something to guarantee or raise a chance of getting more sales, they're going to do that in a heartbeat. Square Enix is not a company that wants niche successes. We saw that, unfortunately, with the sales results of The World Ends With You. But when it comes to smaller games and smaller companies who are banking on their respective niches, this is where the debate gets a little bit more interesting. There are games, obviously, on the indie side and smaller developers that you know they're not going to be mainstream hits. Whether it's due to the content or the gameplay or even just the company itself. These are not games where you're going to be expecting, a million in sales or a million copies sold. And these are games designed around very specific niches. And those niches expect that content to be exactly as they've heard it. There are quite a lot of people who don't like it when content gets altered. They prefer to play the pure experience. What the developers originally intended, what was the main form of the game, and that's it. AK, or quote unquote, screw the haters in their point of view. And this is a fair assessment. Games like this, something like Hunipop, for instance, these are not games that you're going to be seeing mainstream at your GameStop or your Walmart or whatever. They were designed explicitly for a very specific niche, for a very specific fan base, and they're the ones who are going to want to play it. And their argument is when you self-censor games like this, that who is this really going to help? The issue that they're saying is that it's essentially leaving a game in a state that doesn't appeal to anyone. If you were going to essentially make this game quote unquote politically correct or make it more accessible, it's going to require a lot of work. You're going to have to completely, rechange a story, completely new art assets, maybe even completely new dialogue in some cases. And for a lot of smaller games, they may not have the budget for that. And any small changes that you make, it's going to help a little bit, but in terms of the mainstream, they're still going to look down that game. And what the fans argue is that the changes that you do make is going to upset us, so we're not going to play the game because you pissed us off as well. And again, it's one of those things that it's very tricky to talk about. As I said in an earlier critical thought, I am a firm believer against censorship. I don't believe you should be forced to censor any part of your content. Let the chips fall where they lie. But that doesn't excuse accountability. If a developer releases a game that, is very sexually explicit, that's very controversial, they can't go around and say, well, I don't know why people were offended. It worked fine in Japan. That doesn't work here. And what many developers think, and deservedly so, is if I release this game and it's sexually explicit and all that, it's going to affect future sales. Because if I decide to try and make a game that is more appropriate or more accessible, this game is going to come back to haunt me when people say, well, don't support this guy because he or she did this. And when it comes down to it, you have to think about things from the greater market. Now, in an earlier critical thought, I brought up the quote from Mel Brooks, and that was, if you're going to go up to that bell, then you better ring it or don't go up to it at all. And this goes back to what the fans were arguing. If you're going to release a game that has sexually explicit or controversial content in the United States, then either completely gut it, make it as mainstream or as accessible as possible, or they argue, leave it all in, let the fans who wanted that content to begin with get it, and again, forget about the mainstream. The game was never going to be mainstream to begin with. And for today's critical thought, like I said, it's a very tricky topic. As I just said, I'm not for censorship, But I can see things from both points of views. If you want to make as much money as possible and make your game as accessible as possible, then you have to adjust it for the different cultures. But if your intent is to release it for a very specific niche, a very specific fan base who wants this kind of content, then you're kind of pissing them off by making these changes. But for you folks, and like I said at the start, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of comments depending upon how far this video goes out. What do you think about the topics of self-censorship? Do you think games should be as, pure from the original point of view for every country, for every culture? Or do you think it is more important to aim for wider markets and adjust games accordingly? Now, we can, of course, certainly talk about the topic of porting, the international or the more risque versions of games from, third-party stores, but that's another topic. And one other point that I want to ask, and this is for both sides of the debate. For games like this, that again walk that line, that either have incredibly risque content or have it get toned down for American versions, would it be considered acceptable to have, a quote-unquote adult mode in the game that is completely uncensored and that can only be accessed, let's say, either by DLC, by passing an age check, something like that? Would that keep both sides happy, or would it just be considered like a band-aid on the problem? Anyway, let me know in the comments below. But otherwise, we'll end today's critical thought there. Again, this is not an easy topic to talk about, and it's not one that's going to be solved in a 5 to 10 minute video. But thank you for sitting through it. Nevertheless, if you're enjoying the content, be sure to like and subscribe. If you have suggestions for future critical thoughts or games you'd like me to see on the channel, let me know in the comments below. But otherwise, I'm Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games. Be sure to check back daily for more great content here and on Game Wisdom. And of course, be sure to check out our new Patreon campaign for new goals to add more content for everyone to enjoy. But until tomorrow, have a great night, and I'll see you all then. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBycer for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.